Good evening. I'm Ed Murrow. The name of the program is Person to Person. Again tonight, we're going to make a couple of informal visits. I think it was Emerson who once said that talent is not enough to make a writer. Behind each book, there must be a man. Tonight, we're going to visit with two men who have written books whose profession is writing. Professor James T. Shotwell, who has chronicled the efforts of this minor planet to prevent war and achieve a stable peace. And then Ed Sullivan, the syndicated columnist who has chronicled the doings of the entertainment world. We'll be ready to go in just 20 seconds.
Long distance, Maine to Florida.
The American Oil Company, the drillers who produce oil, the scientists who refine it, the seamen who transport it, the men who deliver it, and the Amoco dealers who serve you, all the Amoco people, calling you person to person.
I am not quite sure how to describe or to introduce Professor James Shotwell. He is an old friend, he is a scholar, a historian, a poet, a man of action. And being a historian, he has a high regard for fact and is sometimes not altogether tolerant of those who disregard it, so I'm going to read just a bit about him to be quite sure that I am accurate. For more than 50 years at Columbia University, Dr. Shotwell has been a teacher of history. And from the League of Nations through the United Nations, he has worked, studied, spoken, and written to convince his fellow man that we cannot afford war. Dr. Shotwell is 79 years old. He has written 17 books, edited 230 volumes, and had some 630 speeches, articles, and arguments published in various countries around the world. At the end of World War I, he was a member of the American delegation to the Paris Conference, in charge of the History Division. During World War II, he served on 5 State Department committees considering various aspects of our post-war policy. He is President Emeritus of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. A year ago, a distinguished group of Americans nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and they said in part, no living person has worked longer or more consistently in behalf of the human community and a world at peace. Dr. and Mrs. Shotwell live in a duplex apartment on 86th Street on New York's west side, just a few streets away from the Hudson River. Here for 28 years, they have entertained hundreds of students returning to pay homage to their old and great teacher. Frequently, the Shotwell home has heard unpublished, still secret details of what prime minister said what to a president or a general or a foreign secretary at one of the world's great peace conferences. Is that correct, Dr. Shotwell?
Well, I think, Ed, you're perhaps giving it a little too much the character of a capital of some foreign country. But it's true that there have been a good many interesting leaders of public opinion, statesmen and scholars in this room and around this fireplace.
How is Mrs. Shotwell, sir?
Mrs. Shotwell is well. She has escaped from this ordeal and is in another room in the apartment, in the apartment building, that is,
yes,
watching and listening with a critical ear and eye.
And your daughters?
My daughter, Margaret Grace, is up at Poughkeepsie in her home there, and granddaughter and she are certainly listening now. And Helen, the painter, is also with Mrs. Shotwell here.
Well, this has been a busy week for you, hasn't it, sir?
What's that?
This has been a busy week for you, hasn't it?
Of course. Most weeks are busy, aren't they, Ed?
I suppose they are. Well, what did you think of President Eisenhower's speech before the United Nations?
Well, I think it was a great speech. I had the good fortune to be present and listen to it. It not only great, but it was more, maybe, I hope, epoch-making, because it opened an entirely new approach to this terrible problem of the menace of atomic energy. I wonder, though, Ed, if you recall that when the Baruch plan came up, the comment in Moscow, not here, not by Malik in the United Nations, was that we needed to have this immediately turned for purposes of peace.
Yes.
That was the strong note they took in contrast to what we were talking of in prevention of war. Now it's conceivable that that may be in the mind of some in Washington now, when they hope that a more favorable second thought will come to the Kremlin than seemed at first. Don't you think there's something in that?
I should think there might well be. But, Jim, it's been a busy week for you for another reason, hasn't it? You've been looking at television a little.
You mean this television that was planted on me?
Yes, I remember your saying once that anyone who judged history on the basis of one or two generations really didn't know what he was talking about. Now that you have looked at television for a bit,
right,
you know...
Ed, right, but I'm not always a historian. And I've made up my mind that I've been missing something. I made that up some time ago when I did watch you in the streets of Berlin in one of the most memorable interviews that I have ever listened to or seen, when you talked with Reuter in the ruins of Berlin and gave the American people a glimpse of the devastation there and the possibilities of recovery. I'll never forget your interview there and the way it came over on the television. So you see, I am capable of some kind of discrimination.
Well, Jim, before you became the proud possessor of a television set, what did you do for relaxation?
Well, summertime, I used to play golf a little bit. I don't know whether it was real golf, but I had some fun, especially as up at Woodstock, New York, we used to be able to look at the mountains as well as the balls, and I preferred looking at the mountains.
I notice a lot of paintings on the wall there, Professor Shotwell.
Well, these are by Mrs. Shotwell and Helen. The two that you see here, the Chinese lady and our scrub woman from the go side by side. Art, of course, has no aristocratic distinctions. And I think the scrub woman is just as human as the Chinese Mandarin lady. Beside it is there's William Kroll, a violinist, and the other one you surely will recognize is Dr. Schweitzer.
Oh, yes.
That he posed for Helen. He was very generous indeed, and I think she has caught some of that marvelous spiritual capacity that we're all familiar with now.
You know, I would make a guess that you couldn't tell within a half dozen how many honorary degrees or medals you have received in your life.
I think you're wrong on that. I could add them up. They're not so much as all that. But your director today insisted that I should bring some of these out and show the world. I don't like to do it, but here is the kind of thing you get when you're given an honorary doctorate in Budapest. And I guess there are several, I think there are half a dozen distinctions of various kinds here, but let's get to more real subjects, shall we?
All right. I was wondering what you thought of Sir Winston Churchill's message when he received the Nobel Award, when he said that man's power had increased everywhere except over himself. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think my view of history is entirely different. We are, of course, now in the midst of the greatest revolution in human affairs, in which science is remaking time and space for us and all human relationships, and there's bound to be tremendous disorder and anarchy, as well as backward efforts to recover the past perspective of our old prejudices. But science has come into the world not as an episode for this or that interlude. Science has come for all time, and it has remade the whole perspective of all civilization. Remember that in the past, we always repeated past lives, past events were repeated year after year, generation after generation. And on that, we had the philosophy that history was philosophy teaching by experience. But now we've turned from a repetitive past to a stage that never change, in which change is the normal thing. Every invention calls for a new invention, every discovery a new discovery. And that was going on forever. And now that means that we are faced with a challenge to intelligence as we've never been in the past. And if his intelligence has given us the degree of civilization we now enjoy, increased intelligence with a greater challenge will give us a larger and greater degree of capacity for culture, art, and all the creative, all the creations of the human intellect. So you see, you can't get me on the negative side on that.
Well, I was just going to ask you another question, not in an effort to get you on the negative side, but to get your judgment. You lived through the peace conference after the last war, then came the Second World War, then came Korea. All the time you were working and laboring in the interests of peace. Are you still as confident and hopeful now as you were, say, 25 or 30 years ago?
Quite, on the long perspectives, of course. Not that we're faced with an immediate millennium. That is the absurdity which can never be shared by a historian. In the long run, we are eliminating war. We are now definitely doing it where war was once endemic, that is in Western Europe. The era of Richelieu and Bismarck and Napoleon is gone for all time. There may be a recrudescence of Nazism or something for a while, but as Einaudi, the president of Italy, wrote to me himself, and his idea was shared by Herriot in France and certainly by many distinguished English. War has, in Western Europe, wars that are for the wars of the discovery for methods of making policy work. War as an instrument of national policy is now an anachronism. Of course, a new danger has arisen, as everyone knows.
Do I remember that you summed up your views in poetry once?
Well, yes, I not only once, but I'm addicted to it, I think, Ed. If you're going to run on that line, let me read you a poem. The little volume is going to appear sometime as one of the great events of the coming year. Here is a short poem that will perhaps give you a better, get over in the light, give you a glimpse of the optimism. I headed it once, I gave it the title, The Second Million Years. Behind us, blood and sweat and tears. Before us, like a veil withdrawn, a light strikes the pathway of the years. Is it the dawn? On every side the battle rages. Will this blank horror ever never cease? Can we who fought through all the ages make lasting peace? 1,000,000 years we fought and slew with ruthless tooth and dripping claw in brutal hordes who only knew the jungle law. Now, O lords of earth, as we aspire to meet the sun at heaven's gate, is dust of Nineveh and Tyre our only fate. Blind not the mind with craven fears. Behind the shadows shines the sun. Another dawning 1,000,000 years has just begun.
You mentioned something in that poem about blind the mind with craven fear. Do you think the mind is as illuminated now as it should be in this country?
Well, it's difficult to draw comparisons because with the growth of the democracy, in which I'm a profound believer, we bring into the judgments of civilization and history a vast new element of society that didn't think before, that followed the judgments of those whom they regarded as leaders. Now, undoubtedly, you do get much cause for, we'll say, for arrested, shall we say, arrested optimism in that. But upon the whole, I hold to, I'm sort of repeating myself as a historian, I see the future as the great reservoir of hope.
Well, Professor Shotwell, permit me to say our best thanks for permitting us to come and visit you tonight. we have, I think, been in the presence of a wise, tolerant, and gracious scholar, and I thank you personally, and I'm sure on behalf of a great many people who are looking in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, in just a moment, we will be going to visit the home of Mr. and Mrs. Ed Sullivan here in New York.
Hi, I'm Bob Dixon. First, I want a telephone. No, I didn't mean I was going to place a call. I just want to show you an ordinary handset phone because it helps illustrate an important point about Amoco gas, the premium motor fuel that needs no additive. Now, look here. There's probably nothing more familiar in the imaginations of people these days than an ordinary telephone. It's commonplace. And yet, the telephone is one of the greatest inventions of all time. As you know, it was invented by Alexander Graham Bell, a great inventive genius. Now, what is an inventive genius? Well, it's an individual endowed by nature with abilities far and above those of ordinary men. Natural ability, natural power. And it's the same with Amoco gas. That's why we call Amoco power natural power. The American Oil Company makes Amoco gas with pure, natural petroleum. Nothing is added because nothing extra is needed. Amoco gas can leave no harmful metallic deposit in your car's engine because there's nothing put in that can leave such deposits. So next time, get natural power. Get Amoco gas, the premium motor fuel that needs no additive. And now, here is Ed Murrow.
Ed Sullivan is a newspaper man with an insatiable curiosity about people. All kinds of people. For something like 24 years, he has been writing a syndicated column, and more recently, producing a television program of very considerable merit. The Sullivans have been living at the Delmonico here in New York for the past 10 years. As a matter of fact, since they were married 24 years ago, home has always been a hotel for them, often as much of necessity as of choice. Delmonico's overlooks Park Avenue and its string of magnificent Christmas trees and the shops with expensive gifts. It was not always so with Ed Sullivan, who at one time or another pumped a church organ, worked in a railroad freight yard, a steel mill, a baking company, and as a bus boy at Thompson's restaurant in Chicago. These experiences apparently did him no harm as a columnist. But whether his caddying with Gene Sarazen helped his golf is something we'll have to ask him to answer. Ed?
Yes, Ed?
How's your golf?
Well, Ed, I've been spending more time with my dog here tonight than my golf. We've been trying to get him into this picture, and he's sort of objecting to the whole deal.
Well,
actually, Ed, about my golf, I thought I'd better quit while I was ahead because I played an exhibition with Ben Hogan one day out in New Jersey last summer. And to my delighted amazement, I had myself a 75.
Uh-oh.
And so at that point, I decided to get out of it.
Mrs. Sullivan, is he hard to live with after a rough day at the office or the studio?
Well, no, I don't think he's very hard to live with at all. And I know the day that he had his round with Ben Hogan, he was a perfect joy to live with.
When's the last time you saw him smile?
Just before the show started. I was very nervous, and Ed was teasing me about it. And that was the last time he smiled.
Ed, where did you get this reputation as a stone face, anyway?
I don't know, Ed. I don't think as a youngster I had it, but when I got the first time I went into television, the minute the cameras came barreling in on me, rigor mortis set in. And then when the critics observed this and commented on it, it made me much more conscious of it. Then I couldn't smile for the life of me.
Well, you had an established reputation as a columnist. Why did you decide to go into television?
Well, actually, there were two reasons, Ed. I think probably stage struck might be a characterization of it, because from the time I was a kid, I always went and saw all the vaudeville shows. I saw every act that ever came into the Palace, up in Portchester at our Palace Theater up there. Then I think that every newspaperman actually always wants to find himself a separate source of income, whether it's magazine writing or anything of that sort. Mm-hmm. And so when television, first radio came along, and then television and vaudeville, I went into it to have a little more security.
Did you ever get the urge to go back and work on a small-town newspaper?
Well, I've heard a lot of newspapermen say they have that urge, but I've met very few out of the thousands I've known who wanted to do it, and I don't think I'd want to do it. I'm perfectly content to be in the big leagues in the art.
Mrs. Sullivan, where's your daughter?
Betty's in Washington with her husband, Bob Precht, and I have a couple of pictures of Betty that I'd like to show you.
Oh, good.
Lead the way, Sylvia.
Thank you, Bill.
What's the picture on the desk there?
The picture on the desk?
The picture, isn't it?
Oh, the picture, I'm sorry. The picture on the desk was given to us by Oscar Hammerstein, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Hammerstein, on our 22nd wedding anniversary. And I think it's sort of interesting to note that this picture was made by a silversmith in 1773, which was 3 years before the American Revolution. And I'm sort of very fond of it.
It's a lovely thing.
Thank you.
And now could we see the picture of your daughter?
Yes. Sorry. This is a picture of Betty when she was 10 years old. It was done by Hulda. And here's a picture of Betty when it was 1 minute before her 21st birthday. And Betty and Bob were at a fraternity dance. So they both went to UCLA, and it was there that they met, and they were married after graduation. And Bob was commissioned an ensign in the Navy, and he went away for almost a year. He was in Korea twice, Hawaii, Japan, and then while he was out in the Pacific, he applied for the foreign language school, and he was accepted. So now he's in Washington. And we're very happy to have him in Washington because we know where he is this year, but like most American families, we don't know where he'll be next Christmas.
He sounds like a favorite son-in-law.
He certainly is.
Ed, you got your office right there in your apartment, so to speak, haven't you?
Yes, it's right in here, Ed, and I'd like to go in and show it to you because... Fine. Because in here, at this desk here, Carmen sits, Carmen Santullo, and over the desk over here, Jean Bombard sits, and they're really my right arms in this whole deal. Now here, Ed, is something that I've been proud of. It's a gold typewriter.
Does it work better than an ordinary one?
Well, I don't know. The managing editor says he doesn't get much golden prose out of me. It was given to me by the Springfield, Massachusetts Jewish war veteran, so I've been very, very proud of it. And then there's some pictures here, Ed, and naturally when you're living in a hotel and you haven't got an awful lot of room to keep things, the things you do keep are particularly precious to you. Now, up here, for instance, on this wall is a picture of His Eminence Francis Cardinal Spellman. Now, everybody knows him, of course, and some are privileged to know him as a very warm and modest and thoroughly fine priest and gentleman. And right below that is a picture of a very wonderful American. He certainly, I know that you were very close to him, Jim Forrestal.
Yes.
The last time I saw Jim in his office in Washington, he was telling me how proud he was when he got that busted nose that gave him that very sturdy cast of his features there. Down below, you'll notice that Gable is smiling, is playing golf or walking along the Bel Air golf course on the coast, and I am not smiling. The answer is that Gable has just won some of my money. He's just about to polish me off good. Now, in the center here, this picture, we have a lot of pictures of Betty around as our only daughter. This picture of Betty here, this drawing of Betty, was by Bradshaw Crandall. He gave it to Sylvia on Betty's birthday about 2 years ago. And then up here on the right, here's the toast of the town team. That's standing next to me there is Marlo Lewis, and the bespectacled gentleman is our maestro, Ray Block, and Johnny Ray, our director. We should have had Mark Letty in there, and Eddie Brinkman, and Jack Babb, but they just weren't all in town at the same time. Now, that picture of Lincoln, I got a particular rap out of, Ed, because it was given to me by Robert E. Sherwood, who was quite an expert in Lincolnia, and that's an original, and so is the handwriting. And down below, directly beneath that, you see Durante nosing me out. Of course, Durante and I go back to the days of the old silver slipper. In fact, Jimmy, I'm very proud to say, made his debut on radio on my show. Now, that next row of pictures up there, that top picture of the garden, the crowded garden, the Harvest Moon Ball, actually explains my being in television because it was the CBS TV remote of that led to the contract.
Ed, turning from television to writing, is writing a column hard work or fun?
It's a lot of fun, Ed. You get conditioned to it after I've been writing for about 35 years, and it is a lot of fun. And I noticed it particularly during the newspaper strike, and I imagine every other writer did too. You were just drooling at the mouth trying to express yourself, and quite discomfited that the nation seemed to go on very well without your ad-lib advice to them, too. Over here, Ed, there's a plaque that you may be interested in. That's the Tree Fund of Israel.
Oh, yes.
It's I put on several affairs in the Freedom Train for Israel, and in consequence of that, the Zionist Organization of America planted a tree in Israel, in the Garden of Trees, and in the name of Mrs. Sullivan and myself. But here is the one I think that you'll get a kick out of, because it sort of substantiates the fact that I am a poker face, because this was taken in 1918, the Portchester High School baseball team, and I am sitting here, and despite the fact that they had elected me captain that day, still a poker face.
You look as though you just lost a ball game.
Well, I guess it contradicts my own feeling that I wasn't a poker face as a kid. Here's Frank Keegan, who was one of the great athletes of the county. Red Fur, who could have gone on to be an All-American end in football in any college. This big fella here was a prodigious athlete at Portchester High School and later at Fordham. And he's now the golf secretary of the Westchester Country Club, Sonny Gordon. I see him very often. This is Babe Moger. So this picture brings back an awful lot of memories to me.
Ed, I think you have a pair of shoes somewhere in
Yes, I have. They're right over here. I'm glad you reminded me of them, Ed, because they're the shoes of a very great performer and a very great American. These were the shoes of Bill Bojangles Robinson, the last shoes he ever wore. And you'll notice these lightweight soles here that Bill always explained helped him a lot in his dancing. As a matter of fact, it seems to me, and I'm quite sure it's true, that if Bill Robinson, like a lot of other performers, hadn't given so much of himself in charitable affairs and playing benefits night after night, that he still would have been alive rather than dying of a heart attack. But Bill just kept on till the very end. And there's something I'd like to say about him, Ed, which I've never thought to say before, but I'd like to say this. I think that in death, his life, of course, was a tremendous triumph as a performer and American. But I think in death, he scored his greatest victory as an American. Now, it worked out this way. When we arranged his funeral, it seemed to all of us that although Bill, like a great many other generous performers, had died broke, should be given a funeral befitting his stature as American. And so we arranged it that way. The Board of Education cooperated here in New York. They permitted all of the Harlem school children to take off the afternoon. And so when the funeral cortege started down from the church in Harlem, there were just tens of thousands of these Negro youngsters lining the sidewalk, and that continued all the way down out of Harlem. Now, the important point was that it was if this hadn't been arranged in this fashion, and if Bill hadn't been given the funeral befitting a great champion and a great American, there would have been an area in there in which communist propaganda could have been used against all of us. But after the Bill Robinson funeral, and after these tributes from all over the country, and the fact that Ethel Merman and Mrs. Irving Berlin, Milton Berle, Arthur Treacher, all served up there as ushers, there was no more communist agitation in Harlem for the next year. And all of it...
I'm sorry if the clock has run out on us. Would you please say our thanks to your wife and also to yourself?
I certainly shall, Ed, and
thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment.
Hi. I suppose most of you, at one time or another, have had to put up a shelf or some other appointment in your home using a hammer and screwdriver. Most of us have. Well, as you know, it's necessary, first of all, to set the screw into the wood using the hammer. And then you're ready for the screwdriver. But wait a minute. With this hammer, you don't need any other tool. Because, you see, this is one of those new gadgets. It's a hammer and screwdriver in one. It's a two-in-one instrument, just like new Permaloo motor oil. This is a two-in-one instrument, a two-in-one motor oil, right there. So the next time you go into your Amoco station, be sure you ask the man for Permaloo motor oil, the oil that cleans as it lubricates. And now here's Ed Merle.
Good night and good luck from person to person.
I'm Charles Collingwood. The name of the program is Person to Person. Tonight we'll be going to Hollywood for a visit with a man who is no stranger to television viewers, actor and producer Jack Webb and his wife Jackie Lockery. Then we'll be dropping in on concert pianist Eugene List and his wife here in New York. Mrs. List is the concert violinist Carol Glenn. I'll be back in a moment.
Richard Hudnut, America's first name in beauty, presents Person to Person with Charles Collingwood. Now speaking for Richard Hudnut, here's Betty White.
Here's the important news for every gal who's ever used a lipstick. From now on, you can say goodbye to ordinary lipstick. Goodbye to broken lipstick. Goodbye to lipstick that loses its point. And say hello to fabulous new Lip Quick. Lip Quick, the world's first roll-on lipstick. The first new form of lipstick in 40 years. It rolls on fluid color automatically. Watch. Lip Quick's color flow.
I'm Charles Collingwood. The name of the program is Person to Person. Tonight we'll be going to Hollywood for a visit with a man who is no stranger to television viewers, actor and producer Jack Webb and his wife Jackie Lockery. Then we'll be dropping in on concert pianist Eugene List and his wife here in New York. Mrs. List is the concert violinist Carol Glenn. I'll be back in a moment.
Richard Hudnut, America's first name in beauty, presents Person to Person with Charles Collingwood. Now speaking for Richard Hudnut, here's Betty White.
Here's the important news for every gal who's ever used a lipstick. From now on, you can say goodbye to ordinary lipstick. Goodbye to broken lipstick. Goodbye to lipstick that loses its point. And say hello to fabulous new Lip Quick. Lip Quick, the world's first roll-on lipstick. The first new form of lipstick in 40 years. It rolls on fluid color automatically. Watch. Lip Quick's color flow.
I'm Charles Collingwood. The name of the program is Person to Person. Tonight we'll be going to Hollywood for a visit with a man who is no stranger to television viewers, actor and producer Jack Webb and his wife Jackie Lockery. Then we'll be dropping in on concert pianist Eugene List and his wife here in New York. Mrs. List is the concert violinist Carol Glenn. I'll be back in a moment.
Richard Hudnut, America's first name in beauty, presents Person to Person with Charles Collingwood. Now speaking for Richard Hudnut, here's Betty White.
Here's the important news for every gal who's ever used a lipstick. From now on, you can say goodbye to ordinary lipstick. Goodbye to broken lipstick. Goodbye to lipstick that loses its point. And say hello to fabulous new Lip Quick. Lip Quick, the world's first roll-on lipstick. The first new form of lipstick in 40 years. It rolls on fluid color automatically. Watch. Lip Quick's color flows on smoothly, outlines lips cleanly, always has a perfect point. It takes the place of lipstick, lip liner, and brush. You just moisten your lips, press them together, and there, easy as that, your lips are beautiful all over with creamy, lasting color. This Lip Quick is so great, your store may be out of it, but they'll be getting more soon. Lip Quick in 8 exciting shades. Lip Quick, a new fashion in beauty by Richard Hudnut. And now let's get back to Charles Collingwood.
Jack Webb may well be the best-known fictional detective since Sherlock Holmes. For 7 years now, Webb, as Sergeant Joe Friday, more recently Lieutenant Friday, has been the star of the television series Dragnet, which he conceived. Jack Webb has also distinguished himself as a director and producer of full-length feature films through the Mark VII production company, which he heads. Jack was born in Santa Monica 39 years ago, grew up in Los Angeles, broke into this business as a radio announcer. He's married to the former Jackie Lockery, who was Miss United States in 1952. This is the Republic Motion Picture Lot in the San Fernando Valley. It's also the home of Mr. and Mrs. Jack Webb. They live in an apartment in the building that houses Jack's company. Hello, Jackie.
Hello there, Charles.
Hello, Jack.
Hello, Charles.
Is that fire escape real, or is that part of somebody's movie scenery?
Well, I'm afraid it's real.
It's a lot like the one I had back in Brooklyn. Of course, I didn't expect to find one out here.
Jack, is this really a permanent voting residence home, or do you just live here when you're making films?
No, I'm afraid we live here all year round, Charlie, and we like it very much.
Well, Jackie, I don't see any lawn out there, and this is California. You probably don't have a swimming pool. Do you like living on a motion picture lot?
Charles, I love it. Actually, we have a very unusual backyard. We have a New England street, and we have a residential area, and even a western street. The only problem there is they take the horses away on weekends.
Well, Charlie, we'd like to show you the rest of the place.
I'd like to see it.
We'll play musical stairs here for a minute while we go up.
That sounds like a working fire escape.
It's pretty exciting to be able to look out of your kitchen window and see motion picture and television stars going to work every day.
Well, Charlie, we'll bring you through our family entrance here, if you don't mind. That's our small kitchen area, and this is our living room here.
Oh, say, that's a beautiful room. That's certainly no Hollywood set. It's quite a contrast to the bleak exterior with the wall and the fire escape.
Well, thank you very much. We built this building originally, Charles, to house our production facilities here, and I thought as long as they were about it, they might as well throw in a small apartment. And I'm afraid that, like so many other things that start out small, this just seemed to grow.
Well, it looks wonderful. Jack, why do you live on the lot? Don't you have a yen to get a long way away from the business at the end of a hard day?
Well, yes, I do, Charles, but I don't know. Living here has been so convenient for me, and then, you know, I'm afraid it's no secret that I've put in a great many long hours, particularly in the early days of my television attempt. I used to spend from 12 to 18 hours a day, and now I've managed to cut it down to a very modest 10 to 12-hour day.
That's still a long day, Jack. What drives you to drive yourself into such long hours? Why do you work so hard?
Well, Charlie, I like to think that it's nothing more, actually, than the normal ambition that most people have. However, in my case, I've always been terribly interested in what everybody else does. I'm afraid I'm a little bit nosy. For instance, I always wanted to know what a job it was to thread up a camera. And I always wanted to know what lenses were used to achieve certain shots. And I'm afraid that this goes back to my childhood. I used to go to the library quite a bit and read. And I've always had that insatiable curiosity to know what makes things tick. I'm sure a lot of youngsters growing up have felt that way. And so, consequently, I've spent probably more after school work, maybe, on the sound stages and around the technical paraphernalia of this business of making pictures. And so I guess that accounts for this long day that I put in as a rule.
Well, it's a complicated business, and maybe all that shows in the product, too.
Well, thank you.
Jack, with all those 12 to 18-hour work days, what have you found out about what?
Well, Charlie, I have found out that at the end of a day, you get awfully tired.
There are a lot of people who aren't in the motion picture or television business who found out the same thing. Jackie, I presume that much of your time now must be spent in keeping that beautiful apartment in shape.
Well, it keeps me pretty busy, Charles. Over on this side of the room, I have quite a bit of dusting to do. This is a Remington bronze that I gave Jack last Christmas. It's called the Rattlesnake.
And I always insist that she dust this very carefully since it is mine.
Oh, it's a beauty. You like the Old West, huh?
I'm very fond of it, and I think that Remington was one of the great interpreters of the Old West.
That's a wonderful piece.
And here, she wears out a few other dust claws along the line here, too, Charlie.
Here we have some martini figurines that were made in Italy.
They're very delicate, and this fella does, I think, an interesting job. They're a little on the comic side. Here's something that I'm very proud of. This, and I think I can use the word freely, is a one-of-a-kind item. This is the Steuben Tom Sawyer Cup. Now, this was on display in the British Museum, and Ben Alexander, my old partner, gave it to me, and I don't know whether he sold his house or just gave up all his life savings. I don't think he stole it, because he's a policeman, you know.
Charles, I'd like to show you Jack's pride and joy. Of course, I'm not allowed to put a hand on her.
What's that?
He'll show you all about it.
Well, what she's referring to, Charles, is this is not an atom smasher. This is my hi-fi system, and I'm afraid it looks more complicated than it actually is, but we enjoy playing it very much.
Do you like music?
Oh, I love it. And Jackie does, too. We like it loud.
Do you ever get any complaints from the neighbors?
Well, no, not really. Our closest neighbor is the guard at the gate, and we've converted him. He's a music lover, Charles.
And speaking of Jackie's horses, I think we've spooked a few of them, as they say, or caused them to shy, I'm afraid, during the daytime hours.
It's a wonderful instrument.
Well, thank you. And I guess I've been kind of taking everything in stride here and showing you things that mean so much to me, but may we show you something that means a great deal to both of us.
Going into our den now, Charles.
This is our den, and it's of black wood, African mahogany. And, well, why don't you tell them about that window?
Well, this window is the window that we were married by. We were married right here in this room, in front of this window.
And you'll notice that it's stained glass, and quite an interesting story about it, I think, aside from being married there.
Really? It's very attractive, and it has the right kind of religious look for a marriage, you know. Where did you pick it up?
Well, Charles, actually, I didn't pick it up. Our art director did. Now, I should explain. In this business, we frequently will send people out to scout old homes that are being torn down to make way for new ones. And a great many of these old residences have some lovely and elegant woods and some equally attractive hand carving, which you don't see much today. And we found that it's actually, we save a little money by buying the actual paneling, and in fact, the entire room in toto. We buy the hearth, and we buy the doors, and in this case, we bought some windows. So I kind of appropriated one for our den up here, and that's the story on the window.
Jack, it sounds to me as though if you hadn't been so successful in motion picture and television, you would have made a good antique dealer.
Oh, I'm afraid not, Charlie. I wouldn't, I'm afraid, because I pay everything they ask. I don't even... I'd go broke.
Jack, how did you become an actor? Was this a boyhood ambition of yours?
No, actually it wasn't. As a youngster, Charlie, I spent most of my time in the neighborhood theater, that is the movie theater, and I used to see quite a few silent pictures. And I always had a great desire to be in the production side, much more so than in the acting end of things. And I think I've sort of fell into acting by accident. I've gone on record before, and I don't say this to appear overly modest, but I don't consider myself a great actor. I act by natural instinct, and so I just sort of stumbled into acting. I've been a very lucky man that the public's accepted me as they have.
Well, they've accepted you for a long time, and now every morning, I suppose, you take your lunchbox and you make the long trip down that fire escape on those echoing stairs to your work as an actor and as a writer, director, producer, huh?
No, not quite, Charlie. Which way would you like to see how I go to work? The long way or the short way?
Well, I don't know. We've got lots of time. Show me the long way.
Oh, I'll do better. I'll show you both ways. This is our front door, that is to our apartment here. And this is the door to my office. I'm off. Swift, huh?
That must be the shortest commute in the country, Jack.
Oh, just about. I'm afraid it's something like a fast 18 feet, Charlie.
And that's the office, huh?
This is my office, and this is my desk where I do a great deal of paperwork. When I'm working, I do a lot of it on the sound stage in between shots, but I try to spend as much time here as I can. And you might be interested in, well, I don't have to tell you this. You can see that the office is terribly cluttered, but it's cluttered with things that mean a great deal to me sentimentally. They're gifts from my different crews. They're gifts from actors I've worked with, and so far no one has seen fit to send me a bomb yet. But we have on the walls the frames that you see back there are the presidents of the United States. They're from the Bureau of Engraving in Washington. And we have this figure here, the object on the table, has no political significance whatsoever. It is an elephant. And in a frame on the wall, you will find some badges. You will see there that Ben Alexander has been collecting for me. They're from most of the major cities throughout the United States, and they all carry that curious number 714. I don't know where they got that.
Was it much of a problem switching from the half-hour television films to full-length feature pictures?
No, Charlie. Actually, it was very simple. You see, we don't have to chase that red hand around the clock, so I don't say very simple to make a movie, but the time part is quite easy.
Well, you don't seem to have that harried, middle-of-production look now.
This is after-production harried look.
Yes, you see, I've just finished a motion picture, Charlie, and I hope it will be of some interest to you. It's a movie called 30, and it has to do with the newspaper business.
I'd guess.
I'll be most anxious to get your opinion and all of the other American newsmen and newswomen.
Did you shoot it all on the Republic lot there?
Yes, we did, Charlie, and maybe you'd like to see some of our production facilities here. We'll take you down our long hall here and show you some of the offices that house our personnel.
This is the conference room here on the left-hand side.
And this is our treasurer's office. If we have any money left, we keep track of it here. It's our library and our file room there. You know, we try to keep everything filed, like our scripts and various research material that we use in putting together some of our television and motion picture things.
That's a big office. Where are we now?
Now, you are in our lobby. And we brought you in the family entrance. We thought you at least ought to see the front entrance.
You know, there are lots of things down here, Charles, that Jack could probably show you, but I'd like to show you my favorite. Excuse me, honey.
Yes, dear.
I think this is so amusing. And it came through the United States mail this way, believe it or not, and it arrived right here.
Well, another plus for the post office.
Yes.
Jack, what are you going to do now? What sort of television shows do you want to make?
Well, actually, Charles, I'm afraid I want to lean more in the direction of Dragnet to some degree, but perhaps more factual. I don't know if I've ever said this publicly before, but I hope that it's no secret that I'm very fond of the shows that are classified and fall into the so-called intellectual ghetto. And I think that those shows fill a crying need for television today. The information, we must inform people, and I think Dragnet in its own way may have done that to a small degree with the American police officer, but I like the shows that cover the world news-wise, and I think that there's a desperate need for them, and that's what I would like to do someday if I'm good enough to fill the job.
Well, there's some of us in the business who agree with you. Thanks for letting us come in. Good night, Jackie.
Good night, Charles.
Good night, Jack.
Good night, Charlie. Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll take you for a visit with Mr. and Mrs. Eugene List. But first, a word from our sponsor. Here's Betty White.
Want to hear something wonderful? Listen.
All smart girls say no, 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 no shampooing, no mixing, no odors.
That's right. With new Fashion Quick, there's no shampooing before or after waving, no mixing neutralizers, and no perm odor. Fashion Quick's exclusive lotion neutralizer has built-in shampoo. It actually washes as it waves. Just foam it through, rinse, keep it away from eyes, and it leaves your hair fresh with a beautiful, long-lasting curl. I know you'll love Fashion Quick. And now let's get back to Charles Collingwood.
Pianist Eugene List has been winning concert honors both here and abroad for many years. He made his debut at the age of 10 with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. During World War II, young List, He was a GI then. Won fame as the Potsdam pianist when he was summoned to play privately for Truman, Churchill, and Stalin at the Big Three conference there. He won standing toasts from Stalin, warm congratulations from Winston Churchill, and the lasting friendship of former President Truman. Now, only 41, in March he will celebrate his 25th anniversary as a concert pianist in Carnegie Hall. Eugene Liszt was married in 1943 to violinist Carol Glenn, who has appeared in concerts with him on extensive tours in this country and throughout the world. For the past 12 years, Eugene and Carol Liszt, and now their 2 daughters, have lived in that 4-story brownstone house on the left on Manhattan's west side. Good evening, Carol.
Good evening, Charles.
Good evening, Jane.
Good evening, Charles. May I introduce our 2 daughters? This is Allison.
Good evening, Allison.
Good evening.
How old are you?
8.
And this is Rachel.
Good evening, Rachel.
Good.
How old is she, Jane?
Rachel is 3.
Well, with all the traveling that you and Carol have to do, this must be a comparatively rare gathering of the entire family.
Yes, it is. We're away so much playing concerts and on tour, and it's a real joy to be home to spend a little time with the children. We always enjoy it so much.
You know, Charles, excuse me, but when Gene is home, he's home more than most daddies because he's in the house practicing most of the day.
Well, that's an advantage of having a pianist father. Incidentally, I was going to ask whether we broke in on a music lesson or if you rehearsed a Liszt family musicale for us.
We're having a little musical fun and a little musical play here. The girls have a favorite march. It's called the Children's March by Percy Granger, and just before they go to bed, we thought we'd run through it once. Girls, going to march?
Yeah. Of course, you have to excuse my little violin. This is not the violin that you see in the portrait painted by the artist Dean Fawcett. That's a beautiful Guarneri del Gesù. This is the little violin I began to study violin on, and it amuses the girls to hear me play it.
Ready, girls?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Now, that's what I call a good march. Allison, are you going to be a musician, too?
I don't know.
Well, you'll make up your mind, won't you, Alice?
How about you, Rachel? What are you going to be?
I'm going to be a ballerina.
You're going to be a ballerina?
Yeah.
Well,
before you're a ballerina, you better think about going to bed and growing some strong bones. Though you had a nap this afternoon, still you're up later than usual. So I guess we'll say good night and march you to bed. Good night, Mary. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Mommy. Good night, Dad. Good night.
See you.
Good night, Rachel. Good night, Allison. Carol, both you and Gene started studying music at a very early age, I know. Are you planning, or are you doing the same thing for the daughters?
Well, of course, we do believe in children being brought up in a musical atmosphere, and our little girls, of course, hear a great deal of music all day. I must confess that although Allison has had piano for a year and also some Dalcroze Eurythmics, now she's studying ballet. I confess we were greater experts about these questions when we didn't have children, don't you think so?
Before the children, we knew all about it, yes.
Which instrument are you starting them on, the piano or the violin?
We started Allison on the piano, Charles, and of course Rachel is much too young to begin, but here's an instrument for those who are adventuresome in spirit and willing to try something novel. This is a tambura. This is an Indian instrument. And when we were over there touring in India, I wanted to get this instrument to bring home because it is a beautiful instrument, and it's also an instrument that all of us can play, or practically anyone can play. Not that it doesn't require skill, but it's an accompanying instrument and not a solo instrument. It's a drone instrument, so-called, and it's played throughout the Indian music.
What does it sound like, Gene?
Well, listen to this.
Yeah.
has kind of a buzzy sound.
Yeah.
How do you like that?
I like it fine. Now,
Okay.
you must have got that in India. Are you a collector?
Well, we collect things. I did get this in Bombay, as a matter of fact, carried it home in my arms and made a great hit doing this everywhere because it was such a novelty. But in music, we really haven't the time, nor have we the need for hobbies or collecting things because we're so busy with our own work, which falls into two very distinct categories. There is the gregarious part of the life, which means traveling around all different countries, meeting people and being with people constantly. And that's very delightful and entertaining and interesting and stimulating. But there's another part of the life, which means being at home, being alone with the instrument, and so the two are really so different and fill one's life completely.
I can
Really
understand
like
that.
Two lives in one, isn't it?
Very much so.
And the children, I might say, three.
Gene, one of the biggest thrills in your life must have been the Potsdam concert that you gave.
Yes, it really was a big thrill. One of the moments that I will always remember. And I'd like to, well, here's a picture that I'm very fond of, which was taken at that time. This is a picture with former President Truman. I had the great pleasure at Potsdam of playing for the President and for Stalin and Churchill. And,
Well, the Army treated you pretty well then, didn't they?
the Army treated me very well. As you see in that picture, or as I was at the time a sergeant, and a good bit lighter, too. Many pounds lighter, I would say. But the Army really did treat me very well. I had one unusual incident at the beginning of my Army career. My first sergeant was named Scales. Always amused me because I'd practiced scales so much. And he said, Private List, we want to keep you close to your instrument. See all the pianos over there in the warehouse? Well, get over there and start moving them around. That was my initiation to Army life.
But I do think the Army was better to me, Gene, because at least before you went overseas, they tied you down in one place long enough for me to have the chance to lead you to the altar.
Well, that was a happy day.
Tell me, do you two play only the violin and piano, or do you have other instruments too?
Charles, in moments of great weakness, we essay little efforts in other directions, and this is one of our wilder experiments.
Oh, you mean you want me to show them our non-professional playing of this little East Pakistani violin?
Yes, bring it out. I think that Charles would like to see that.
And you want to play your flute, I suppose, that you got in Calcutta.
Yes, just call me a virtuoso of the Calcuttian flute. I am not.
Well, you practice. This is little clay violin, a little street violin, a one-string violin, actually. And so we're going to play our piece now. We played it when we got home, remember?
Oh, we were so happy after having traveled all through the Far East, India and Indonesia and all that. And finally we got home to Charleston, West Virginia. It was our first concert after traveling abroad. And we were so thrilled about being home, we whipped up this little encore to play at the very end of our concert. It took everyone aback, I must say. This is our sort of Pakistani-American version of Home Sweet Home. Now, just let me get my fingers set here.
Got it?
I hope so.
That's wonderful, Gene and Carol.
That's pretty far out, isn't it,
That's
Charles?
wonderful. Thank you, too, for letting us visit you tonight. And if you'd say good night to Miss Rachel and Miss Allison, and apologize for me for keeping them up so late.
Well, thank you very much, and good night, Charles.
Good night.
Good night, Charles.
I'll be back in a moment to tell you about next week's guest right after a word from our alternate sponsor.
We hope you're all feeling fine this evening. But if we were to turn this television camera around and visit you tonight, would we perhaps see something like this? Would we find you feeling so tired and run down after the day's work that you have almost no energy left? Now, if you often feel like this man, remember your weak, worn-out feeling may be due to what doctors call iron deficiency anemia, or as we call it more simply, tired blood. To feel stronger fast, take Geritol, the high-potency, iron-rich tonic that begins to strengthen tired blood in just 24 hours. Just 2 tablespoons of Geritol liquid or 2 Geritol tablets contain twice the iron in a pound of calf's liver. Soon you should have more strength than perhaps you've had in a long time. Check with your doctor. And if you've been feeling worn out because of tired blood, take Geritol, liquid or tablets, every day. You'll feel stronger fast in just 7 days or your money back.
Next week, we'll be going to Temecula, California, and the ranch of mystery writer Earl Stanley Gardner. Mr. Gardner, who created Perry Mason, is one of the most prolific writers of our time. His 100th book is due to be published in January. Next week, we'll also be calling on Marge and Gower Champion in their Beverly Hills home. The Champions have been dancing together professionally since they were in their teens. Today, they're probably the best-known husband and wife dance team in show business. So, until next Friday, from person to person, good night.
Richard Hudnut, America's first name in beauty, has brought you Person to Person with Charles Collingwood. Produced by John A. Aaron and Jesse Zausmer.
Girls, if you were born blonde, but your hair has gradually darkened, here is something just for you. Richard Hudnut, Light and Bright. Light and Bright is so easy to use. Each simple application makes your hair a little lighter, a little brighter. You stop when your hair is as blonde as you like. It's fun and it's easy to be blonde again. So be as blonde as you were born to be. Light and Bright by Richard Hudnut.
Miss White's gown by Rudolph. Fur by Frederica.